What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I will be setting up my fantasy cruncher for tonight's showdown slate between the Falcons and the Panthers. This is for large field GPPs on DraftKings. Some of the steps that I'll be taking here, I would not be taking in a cash game setting or in a small field GPP setting, but all of the steps I'll be taking here are for playing the largest field GPP on DraftKings. While you're coming in, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We'd appreciate it. All right, first thing I'm going to do is check out what the optimal lineups look like. So I'm going to actually go into advanced options, and right away I'm going to change offensive players versus defense to 5 players. That is the setting that I'm going to be using later. I like to allow for 5 players from one team against just the defense of the opposing team. It's not something that people play frequently. People don't like to see, if a defense against 5 players from the other team, because generally if you have 5 players from one team, it means they put up a lot of points, and that obviously hurts the defense. But there are ways for the defense to get there along with the opposing offensive players. So I am going to have this set to 5 players, but for now, the reason I'm doing it is just because I want to see what the optimals look like currently. So I'm going to save that. I'm just going to crunch out 10 lineups. All right, so looking at the top 10 optimal lineups, leaving 400 on the table, leaving 100 on the table, 200, 300. So all of the top optimal lineups, actually this one is leaving 1100 on the table. So most of the top optimal lineups are, using fairly close to the full salary. We've really only got this one exception here where a full 1100 is left on the table. I like to see that as a gauge for how much salary I'm going to need to leave on the table in order to get unique, and to see, whether I can leave salary on the table and still have close to the optimal lineup. So I just like to have an idea of what the top optimal lineups look like. So I wanted to check that out. All right, now the next step I'm going to take on this main screen, I'm going to go in. I have a preset quick view saved that just shows these columns in the middle of the screen that I want to be able to see easily: my projection, my exposure cap, how much I'm getting to different players once I have crunched some lineups, and ownership projections. Those are the things that I'm really looking at closely when I am building my lineups. Next thing I'll do on this main screen before I go into advanced options is go into captain tab up here, and I'm just going to set an exposure cap on captains. I'll set it at 20%. I'd say that is the number that I use most frequently here. You get up to 20% of any player in the captain spot. And then I'm going to go into advanced options, which is where I do most of my work. All right, in advanced options, I'm just using 2 tabs here, the general tab and the groups tab. Starting in the general tab, unique players per lineup. I'm building 150 lineups, so I'm going to leave this at 1 unique player per lineup, meaning that my lineups can be 1 player different from each other. If you're building 20 or fewer lineups, I would generally suggest changing this to 2. Team salary, I'm not going to set a minimum salary here. I am going to set a maximum salary. The only reason I do this, and I only do this on like Showdown, MMA, for sports where I'm concerned about my lineup being duplicated by a lot of other teams in the field. It's the only time that I put in a maximum salary. But for Showdown, I feel it's necessary to avoid the most duplicated lineups. I'm not trying to necessarily get entirely unique with my lineups, but I do want to avoid those lineups that are going to be duplicated 100 times, 200 times, 500 times. We see those lineups win occasionally, but when those lineups win, even if you get lucky enough to win, which no matter how good your lineup looks, it takes a lot of luck to win on Showdown, they're still not winning that much money. So I want to make lineups that are going to be winning a lot of money when I do get lucky enough to win. So I'm going to avoid duplicates by leaving some salary on the table. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to leave 1,000 on the table. So I'm going to set a max cap of 49,000, leaving $1,000 under the max allowed by DraftKings for the purpose of avoiding duplicates. And as we saw in my top 10 projected just by raw projections, we had a lineup that was leaving 1,100 on the table. So those lineups can be very viable where you're leaving 1,000 or more on the table. So I like to leave some salary. All right, offensive players versus defense. We already went over this. I'm leaving it at a max of 5 players. especially in a game like this, we could potentially see Carolina do absolutely nothing on offense, but they could have a pick six on defense. And then we're going to see if that happens, most likely we're going to see 5 Atlanta offensive players, or I guess Atlanta's defense would be included in that too, versus just the Carolina defense on the other side. It's entirely feasible for a defense to be the highest scoring player from a slate, or from a team on a given slate. And this is in particular a slate where I think it's viable that one of these teams could completely sputter on offense and yet do well against the opposing offense, which neither of these offenses are that great. So I think it's definitely viable on this slate to play just the defense from one team against 5 players from the opposing team. Exposure caps, you saw I set a cap on the captain spot already of 20%, but for the rest, I'm going to leave this at 100%. And if I want to get less of certain players, I'll take steps later. If that happens, if I'm getting to like 100% of one player against my lineup, across my lineups, I might make some changes to it, but I'm going to at least allow it. Randomness, I do use randomness, and I am going to turn this up to 50%. I've thought about actually lowering this number to something like 30%, just for the ease of getting the lineups to look the way I want them to, because I do a lot of tinkering to get my lineups to get to exposure caps that I like, and it would be easier with lower randomness. So you could consider using less than 50%. And if you are using classic randomness, I would probably recommend 30 or 40%, something in that range. And of course, if you want even more control over your lineups, use less randomness. But for now, I'm going to set this to 50%. Minimum projection included in calculation set to 3. I think I'm going to leave that at 3 for now, at least. What this means is that any player projected for fewer than 3 fantasy points is not currently included in my player pool. If I want a player to be included in my player pool, I might just give them little boosts to get above this 3 threshold. Sometimes I do lower this to 2. There are certain games where, if I set a player to, they have a projection for 1.5 and I change their projection to 3, I'm going to get like 40% of that player. I've seen that happen. And then I have to do a lot of manually adjusting projections if I, upwards for other players. So I get less of that player. So I would, in that case, it's probably easier to just change this to 2, give them a projection of 2. But for usually I leave this at 3 and I just change projections to get above that 3 number if I want to. Players from each team max, again, don't mind having 5 from one team against 1 from the other, so I'll leave that there. And then groups. This is where I do a lot more of my work. Generally, the groups that I set are typically related to the quarterback position. The reason being the quarterback is the one position where, first of all, they tend to be some of the more expensive players on the team, but also for quarterbacks, in particular for non-rushing quarterbacks, on every play that they're involved as a thrower, they are scoring fewer fantasy points than the other player on the team, the receiver on their team. They're, every pass, the receiver gets a point per reception. They also get more points per yard on the play. They also get 6 points for a touchdown versus the quarterback only getting 4. So you really have to be more thoughtful with the way you use quarterbacks in your lineups than other positions. So I'm going to start here with a Marcus Mariota captain group, and I'm going to, you can see here Marcus Mariota in the captain spot. I'm going to make him my key player. So that means that this entire group is just about lineups that have Marcus Mariota in the captain spot. Guys, we have a great offer for new users only. You can get full access to everything Stokastic has to offer for NFL for 3 days free. Projections, ownership, 1v1 tools, lineup generator, top stacks tool, all free. 0 risk. Sign up now. The link is in the description of this video. Note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included in this offer. I'm going to rename this right now. Captain. And now I'm going to go through and add all of the viable pass catchers from Atlanta to a secondary group. And when I say viable, all I really mean, I'm looking for the Atlanta logo and a projection. That's all I care about at this point in the day. I'm just trying to get every potential pass catcher into this group. And if some of these players are made inactive later, doesn't matter. Their projection will change to 0. I won't be getting them anyway, so not a concern. And now it's questionable, actually, whether you want to include running backs. I was pretty surprised to see that Cordarrelle Patterson has not been targeted a ton as a pass catcher so far this year. He's used a lot more as a runner. I think he's been targeted something like 14 times, like just like fewer than two targets per game so far this year for Cordero Patterson. So it's questionable whether you want to include him in this group. I still think, given his history as a wide receiver, it's a pretty small sample size. So I'm going to include Cordero Patterson in this group. Probably not going to include Huntley or Algier. You could consider whether you want to. Again, these guys just don't get a ton of targets out of the backfield. So I don't see a ton of correlation between Mariota and these guys. Maybe you could think about giving a little bit of a boost. I think we have seen some research that with rushing quarterbacks, there is still actually positive correlation between the quarterback and running backs, even if they're not that involved in the passing game. So I guess I'll include them. So for Marcus Mariota, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this only apply plus minus adjustments button. I think that generally, if you have Mariota in the captain spot, you want to have at least one pass catcher. So you don't necessarily need to click this. And if I were making, again, 20 or fewer lineups, I probably would not click this box. I probably would say, Mariota, although he's a rusher, he's not like Lamar Jackson. He's rushed for a little bit over 300 yards through 9 games, which is like 6th or so in the NFL. He's also rushed for 3 touchdowns. So he clearly has that rushing upside that I think that he's viable as a captain with no pass catchers. But I don't think it's the most likely outcome. I think most likely, if Mariota is the optimal captain, we're going to have at least one pass catcher somewhere in the flex. Because I'm making 150 lineups, I'm not going to require it. I'm just going to give boosts to these pass catchers to make it more likely that I get 1 or 2 pass catcher in lineups that have Mariota at captain. And these running backs, I think I'm going to give smaller boosts than I did to the wide receivers, just because they haven't really been that involved. Maybe Cordarrelle, maybe all of them. I'll just give a little 4% boost. Again, these numbers, I've said it before, there's no magic to these numbers. This is just based on my, trial and error. I've kind of come to these being kind of the starting place that I start with as, I get to more of these players in lineups with the quarterback at captain, but they're also not going to be jammed into every lineup. And then I adjust as I go after I see what the actual lineups look like. So this is typically a starting place for me around these numbers when I give, a full boost to the pass catchers and then kind of a minor boost for less involved pass catchers or pass catchers who already project well enough that they're going to be in a lot of lineups. And I don't want there to be 100% of that pass catcher in a lineup with the quarterback. So these are generally my starting place. All right, next group, I'm going to make a PJ Walker captain lineup. All right, so for this group, Philip Walker in the captain spot, I'm going to make my key player. So the entire group is related to lineups with PJ Walker in the captain spot. And again, adding all of these pass catchers to a secondary group. Again, these pass catchers have not been very involved in these running backs have not been very involved in the passing game so far this year. So really questionable whether you want to include them in this group. I think I'm not going to. I think I'm not going to give them a boost necessarily in my PJ Walker lineup. So I'm just going to leave them out. Yeah, I think that's the approach I'm going to take. I'm not going to be including the running backs for now. It's debatable, though. You could consider including the running backs in the group. They obviously get some targets, just not a ton of routes run, not a ton of targets per route run. So I think I'm not going to include them. PJ Walker also not a great rusher. So far this year, he's rushed for 25 yards. So just not on 3 rushes. So he did have at least one, larger rush, but in general, just not rushing enough that I want to be playing Philip Walker without any pass catchers, especially in the captain spot. So I am going to require at least one pass catcher in every lineup that has Philip Walker in the captain spot, just because he doesn't have that same kind of rushing upside that Marcus Mariota has. And then I'm going to be giving boosts to these pass catchers. Again, DJ Moore, 15 fantasy point projection at 9,200. That's one of the higher projections that we have on the slate. And I don't want to get him in every lineup that has Philip Walker at captain. So maybe I'll give him a slightly smaller boost, something like that, maybe a 6% boost, and then give 12% boost to these other pass catchers who I don't think I have that same concern with. All right, that looks good. And then finally, I'm going to make one more group for now. That is a Walker flex group. And I'm going to go find Philip Walker in the flex spot, make him my key player, and then add all of these pass catchers from the Panthers to a secondary group. Again, not including the running backs, but I don't think it would be a mistake necessarily to include them. And because I have Walker in the flex spot now, I can also include all of these receiving options in the captain spot. So DJ Moore in the captain spot, Terrace Marshall in the captain spot. All right. And for this group, I think I'm just going to leave it just like this. If any key players use, so Philip Walker in the flex, I'm going to require at least one pass catcher somewhere else in the lineup. I'm not going to click the only apply plus minus box. I'm also not going to give any kind of boost. I'm just going to say, yeah, if I have Philip Walker in my lineup, I want to have at least one pass catcher in there somewhere just because he has not shown a ton of rushing upside. So it'd be really hard for Philip Walker to be the optimal captain without somebody on his team make it in there. Optimal in the lineup. This is not about Walker captain. It'll be tough, even in a flex spot, for Philip Walker to put up enough fantasy points to be optimal in a flex spot without bringing along at least one pass catcher. Again, given the scoring dynamic, where on every passing play, one of these pass catchers is going to be outscoring him. It's just unlikely that he will spread the ball around enough throughout the game that he's somehow the optimal in the flex spot without having somebody from his team, some pass catcher in there also. So I'm going to require at least one in lineups that have Philip Walker in the flex spot as well. And I think that's all I'm going to do for groups here. From time to time, I talk about other groups you could set. You could set a group that says if you have a Panthers pass catcher in the captain spot, you have at most one or at most two Panthers pass catchers somewhere else in the lineup. That's not something that I'm going to do right now, but that is something if you're seeing a lot of lineups that have like DJ Moore in the captain spot and then also have LaVisca and Terrace Marshall and Shai Smith and Ian Thomas in the lineup, then I might go back and make that kind of group, or some combination of these pass catchers making up a big portion of those lineups. I don't think that's going to be a concern here, so it's not something I'm going to do right now. But that is a kind of group that you can make to kind of make your lineups a little bit more correlated if you have concerns about lineups that aren't going to make any sense. But we'll wait and see what our lineups look like. All right, and now I'm going to just show you, if you look at the running back position, Avery Williams currently doesn't project well enough to make it into any of my lineups. Raheem Blackshear, 2.96, not going to make the cut. That's below 3 fantasy points. We have a cutoff at you need to project for at least 3 fantasy points to be included in the player pool. Maybe Blackshear is close enough that even before I run any crunch, I'm just going to give him up to 3 there. Still at 5,000. Probably not making it into any lineups, but you never know. Wide receiver. Maybe Kadero Hodge is somebody I want to get into some lineups. Don't feel strongly about that right now, but I'll give him the low boost to 3. And here's where I should note. So while I'm making this video, I'm not really making player decisions. I will be releasing an article later today after I've done a bit more research into the teams, the players, who's getting the snaps, who's running routes, et cetera, et cetera. Once I've done a little bit more research, I will be publishing an article at Stokastic, and then I'll also be on Live Before Lock tonight. So if you want to hear my player takes, that's where you do it, in that article and on Live Before Lock. I will, if I think of it later, I'll actually post the article in the comments below this video. Otherwise, it'll be on the Stokastic NFL page later on in the day. But for the purpose of this video, I'm not really making those player decisions. I'm just trying to show you my general strategy as I'm setting this up. And the only things I've really looked at so far are the quarterbacks, how often they rush, and then the running backs, look at their receiving stats to decide whether I want to include them in groups with the quarterbacks. Other than that, I'm not really concerned at this point while I'm making this video with player decisions. That's something that's going to happen on later in the day. I usually am building during Live Before Lock, after we get those inactives, kind of a tight window there. So I haven't really done all of the research to figure out which of these players I want to include and which I don't want to include in my player pool. That'll come later. For now, I'm just trying to show you how Fantasy Cruncher works and how I set up Fantasy Cruncher to be making these decisions later on. So for now, Ian Thomas, close enough to 3 fantasy points. I'm just going to boost him up to 3. I could do the same with Ricci and Hesse here. I don't even really know anything about these guys. I could give them little boosts. I think I'm not going to for now. Okay, and now I'm just going to crunch out 150 lineups using my projections. And there are 2 things that I look at after doing so. First, I'll look through the lineups themselves and see if they correlate the way I want them to. Just, do these lineups make sense? Does this lineup have a path to victory? And then the second thing I look at is player exposures. Am I getting to players in the amount that I want them throughout my lineups? So looking at this first lineup, I've got Mariota. Didn't require any pass catches with Mariota. I just gave boosts. I'm totally fine with having a lineup that has Mariota at captain with just Kyle Pitts as a pass catcher, because Mariota can do some damage on the ground, get some fantasy points by rushing the ball, and then only bring along 1 pass catcher. That's the difference between now Mariota and Philip Walker. I don't love this as much. Philip Walker, again, in the captain spot. Typically, the way that Philip Walker is going to be optimal in the captain spot, he's obviously putting up a lot of fantasy points, and he's not doing a lot of it on the ground. Historically, he doesn't pick up a lot of fantasy points on the ground. So I would prefer to have 2 pass catchers in the flex spot when I have Philip Walker at captain. And you can see right here, I don't. I just have DJ Moore and the kicker for the Panthers. So I don't love it, but I did allow it because I still think, even a guy like Philip Walker, he could obviously rush one in from the 1-yard line. It's feasible for him to be there. I just don't want that to be the majority of my Philip Walker captain lineups. So maybe what I'll do right away is just look at those lineups. So I'm going to click on this captain tab, Philip Walker, look at those lineups in particular. And you can see right away, just one pass catcher, 2 pass catchers. That didn't include Deontay Foreman. He's not really that involved. Just 1 here, both Foreman and Hubbard, who are not all that involved. Now we've got, Tremble and DJ Moore. So that's 2. Visca and DJ Moore. So 2 for that one. DJ Moore and Chuba. I mean, I don't mind having these running backs in there because I do think even though they haven't been that involved, they still could obviously catch a short pass, from Philip Walker for a touchdown. So there is, I think, the potential for this lineup to work out with the odd Chuba Hubbard passing touchdown, but I don't want to see a ton of it just because it doesn't have the same correlation as guys like Terrace Marshall, DJ Moore, these pass catching options. In general, I think I'm okay with the way these are turning out. Most of them have at least 2 potential pass catching options when you include guys like Foreman and Hubbard, and then plenty of them have multiple actual receivers who are a little bit more likely and tight ends who are a little bit more likely. So I think I'm okay with the way these are looking. Now here's one you can see right here. Mariota, naked Mariota in the flex. Again, I didn't make a group for Mariota in the flex because I think I'm okay with that. And you see it here too. Actually, a lot of these with just Mariota and no pass catchers. I think I'm okay with that. The reason being that Mariota is, one of the top rushing quarterbacks in the league. But again, he's not like a Lamar Jackson. So, 300 rushing yards is great through 9 games, but it's not like at that level where I think that he's likeliest to get there without bringing a pass catcher along. So maybe I do want to go back and make a group, just given the number of lineups I'm getting with just Mariota in the flex without any receiving options from the Falcons. But I guess before I do that, I'm just going to look at how much am I getting? Like, do I just want to change my exposure to those Falcons and make those a little bit less common? So first, now I'm going to go up to look at the players themselves. So I'm going to go quarterback, getting to 43% PJ Walker, 75% Mariota in the flex, and then looking in the captain spot. Okay, so I'm getting like 95% Mariota right now. I don't know that I want that. It's probably a little bit much for me, so maybe I'll make some adjustments. Probably not going to change Mariota's projection just yet. I'm just going to see what happens as I make some adjustments elsewhere. All right, so I'm getting to 16% Cordarrelle Patterson, 55% Deontay Foreman. My guess is I'm not going to want that, especially if Hubbard is active, which I believe is the latest we're expecting him active. Yeah, okay, he is questionable. We'll have to wait and see. Probably regardless, I don't know that I want 55% Deontay Foreman. Maybe I'd be okay with that if Hubbard is out. He is the primary ball handler against a bad Atlanta defense, so maybe I'd be okay with it. But just getting a 5% Tyler Algier, maybe I'd go in. And again, I'm not making these actual decisions right now. I'm just showing you my general thought process, how I go through my lineups. So maybe I'd go through and I'd say, I want more than 5% of Tyler Algier. I'm going to give him a little bit of a boost. I get more. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. If you are new to Fantasy Cruncher, new to DFS, I would generally recommend, instead of doing what I'm doing here and making actual changes to the projections, I would go in and just hit that thumbs up or thumbs down. As long as a player has greater than 3 fantasy points, you're giving them an 8% boost or negative boost when you hit those thumbs up and thumbs down. So that's probably the better approach if you're new to this. I've been doing it for a long time. I'm comfortable with actually changing projections a bit until I get to exposure levels that I like. So that is the approach that I'm taking. But again, if you're new, maybe just hit that thumbs up, thumbs down. And I am giving Cordarrelle Patterson a little bit of a boost to get above 16%, I think. All right, so Kadarius Hodge, I gave him that boost to 3 fantasy points. Now I'm getting to 17% Kadarius Hodge. I don't really know if that's something I'm going to want. I guess for now, I'm just going to make adjustments to other players, and that might be enough to not get that much. But 2 targets, 0-0. I mean, he has just not been that great this year. I probably don't want 17%. I'm probably going to try and get above that 1.5% number, but probably not quite to that extent. But for now, I'm going to see if that sticks once I make some other adjustments. Like Laviska Shenault, I think is viable. He's only projected for 7% ownership. Currently, I'm getting 2%. Maybe I make an adjustment here. And as I make the adjustment to Laviska Shenault and other players, as I project them higher, I'm naturally most likely going to get less of Kadarius Hodge. The reason being, projections are all relative to each other. Projections don't mean anything in a vacuum. They start to take on meaning for the purpose of crunches once they're, put in there relative to other players. The higher projected players are going to get more. If I, project everybody, if I give everybody a 100% boost on their projection, they're still going to be exactly the same relative to each other. So keep that in mind if you are making adjustments. All right, maybe I want some Damiere Byrd. Looks like I'm probably going to need to get at least up to around this 5 projection that we have for Shi Smith. He's more expensive. If I give him the same projection that I have for Shi Smith, I'm probably going to be getting to less of Damiere Byrd than Shi Smith because he's more expensive. Maybe as a case, I give a little bit of a boost. Drake London, maybe I want a little bit more. Again, we'll be making these decisions later on. Probably don't want 74% plus 20% of DJ Moore. That's probably more than I'm going to want. Maybe you do want that much. If you're, not playing 150 lineups, maybe you want 100% DJ Moore. Just lock him in, make decisions elsewhere. But I think I'm going to probably want less than 94% of DJ Moore. Usually the way I approach this is I start by giving players positive boosts. And after a couple runs of that, if I'm still getting to 94% DJ Moore, then I would start, very incrementally giving him lowering his projection slightly. For now, I'm not going to change his projection at all. Ian Thomas, I gave the boost to 3. I'm still getting just 6%, so I'm okay with that. Only getting to 23% Kyle Pitts. Maybe I want a little bit more. Honestly, just given the small projection boost that I gave here, maybe it doesn't even go up that much because of all the other players I've changed. Getting to a ton of the kickers. If I don't change their projections, I'm likely to get less of them in the next run. I think I'd be okay with getting less than this number for the kickers, so I'm just going to leave them as such. Defense is certainly interesting in this spot. Pretty bad offenses. And again, one way that I like to get different is playing, like a quarterback against the opposing defense. The field shies away from it more so than it should, most likely. So I think I'm okay getting to some defense versus the opposing quarterback. Maybe I'll give a little bit of a boost to the Panthers just to make sure that I'm still getting, double digits, somewhere in that range of the Panthers defense. All right, now I'm going to crunch out 150 again. Guys, we have a great offer for new users only. You can get full access to everything Stokastic has to offer for NFL for 3 days free. Projections, ownership, 1v1 tools, lineup generator, top stacks tool, all free. Zero risk. Sign up now. The link is in the description of this video. Note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included in this offer. All right, so this looks like, I'd be fine with these numbers. Ooh, getting to still a ton of the kickers. All the adjustments I made elsewhere were not enough to lower the kicker ownership at all. Again, I'm not going to change them just yet. If I get to too much, then maybe I will make some negative adjustments. Now, not getting too much Ian Thomas, maybe I'd go through and say, hey, I'm just going to give him a tiny bit of a bigger boost to make sure that I'm getting to more than 1%. Maybe Tommy Tremble, maybe I want a little bit more than 3%. Kyle Pitts, maybe I'm okay with that number. If I don't make an adjustment and I adjust elsewhere again, I'm probably going to get a little bit less than 25% Kyle Pitts, but I'll keep going until I get the amounts that I want of each player. Okay, so I lowered my exposure to Kadero Hodge from like 16, 17%, whatever it was, to now 11%. That's good. I think that I probably want even less of Kadero Hodge than 11%. So I'll again make adjustments elsewhere, maybe boost to LaVisca. I want some more Shi Smith. Demir Bird, again, I got less of Demir Bird than Shi Smith, even though they had essentially the same projection. Maybe if I want a little bit more Demir Bird, I'll have to give him higher than Shi Smith. Lumita Zacchaeus, probably one of the more interesting plays on the slate at 5,400. Give him a little bit of a bigger boost. Now you can see here, Drake London is cheaper than Terrace Marshall, and I had them projected the same, so it makes sense that I got to more Drake London than Terrace Marshall. It's not, necessarily always the case because we do have correlations built in. So, like if I were getting to a ton of Philip Walker and I'm giving a positive boost to Terrace Marshall in those lineups, it's not a one-to-one necessarily. Sometimes I could actually get more of Terrace Marshall, even though they project the same. And Terrace Marshall is more expensive, but in general, these are the things, way I'm thinking about it. So I'm going to give these guys even more of a boost. Still getting to probably 93% of DJ Moore. That's more than I want. Again, for now, I'm just going to leave his projection as is. Now, really, because he is one of the more expensive and better projected plays, probably depends on whether I'm the amount that I get of DJ Moore is more relevant to how much I get of other high-end options. So maybe if I give a little bit of a boost to Philip Walker, I'd get less, not necessarily because of the positive correlation. Cordarrelle Patterson, there's one that's going to be, it's probably going to directly affect my DJ Moore exposure. So I'm going to give a little bit of a boost, maybe a bigger boost to Cordarrelle Patterson and see what happens. That was a pretty significant boost I just gave him. Right now, let's see what happens. I'm going to change this all the way up to 17 fantasy points, so like a 2-point. Yeah, it's a pretty significant. I think I maybe did 15 before. I don't know. About a 2 fantasy point boost to Cordarrelle Patterson. I was getting 8.7% Cordarrelle Patterson and also 73% DJ Moore in the flex. I want to see what happens now based on that. Obviously, I made some other adjustments as well, so it's not a one-to-one here. not a controlled experiment. But yeah, I got to less of DJ Moore naturally because you can't have all of the expensive guys, especially leaving some salary on the table. So I got to less DJ Moore. I got to more Cordarrelle Patterson. That makes sense. Generally, players, if I adjust projections for a player, it's going to affect the other players in their price range more than the players outside of their price range. Of course, if I give big boosts to Avery Williams, Keith Smith, these guys who are only 200, that's also going to be a boost essentially to all of the most expensive players. It's going to make it easier to get to more of those expensive players. So again, all of these projections are relative to each other. Everything you do kind of affects everything else that you do. You need to be keeping that in mind if you are doing what I'm doing and actually making adjustments to player projections. Anyway, I'm not going to keep going through and do this a million times. Here, I'm going to be, making my lineups later on in the evening, but just looking through my lineups now to see if they correlate the way I want them to. Now I've got Marcus Mariota with one pass catcher. That's great. Marcus Mariota with one pass catcher. Mariota in the captain spot with 1, 2 plus a running back. That's great. Here's Mariota with no pass catchers. Again, I'm okay with it because of the rushing upside. I don't want to see it a ton, but I am okay with it. Mariota with Drake London. Mariota, Drake London. Here again, Mariota naked. Not my favorite thing to see, but if I see it in, 10 lineups across 150, I'm fine with it. For the most part now, I am seeing more pass catchers in my lineups with Marcus Mariota, and that's just a result of changing projections. So I got to more of those pass catchers in general. I have not gone in and made a group where I say give boost to the pass catchers with Mariota in the flex. That is something you could consider doing. That's something I might consider doing because I am seeing quite a bit of Mariota with no pass catchers here. So maybe I'd go back and make a little group and say group Mariota flex. Go find Mariota in the flex spot, make him a key player. And again, go through and find every Falcons pass catcher with a projection, add them to a secondary group. Including Cordarrelle Patterson here. And then again in the captain spot as well. And then you could just say, I think that's good enough. All right, then you can just say only apply plus minus adjustments, and then I'm just going to, give a slight adjustment to make it more likely that I get to pass catching options in lineups that have Mariota even in the flex. So I'm not requiring it still. I think I'm okay with having some Mariota in the flex with no pass catchers, but just to make it more likely because I don't want to see it in 20% of my lineups. I'd rather see it in a smaller proportion. So I'm just going to give slight boost to all of these pass catchers in Mariota flex lineups, maybe 6% or so. And this is not a science. Science only to the extent that science requires experimentation, and I will be doing some trial and error here. But in general, these numbers, there's not much to it. What I found to be approximately the amount that I need to do to get to as a starting place to see what the lineups look like. And then crunch out 150. And of course, I'm still seeing Mariota by himself right away in the very first lineup. But then, not here, not here. Here we have just Cordarrelle Patterson, who I did include in that group. Cordarrelle Patterson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. So maybe I'd have to look through a little bit more to determine if I want to give a bigger boost to pass catchers from the Falcons with Mariota in the flex. But in general, I think these look okay. None of these lineups, to me, look like lineups that have zero chance of winning. They all look like, I could see a scenario where this lineup wins out. Marcus Mariota scores a touchdown on the ground, rushes for 50 yards, picks up some fantasy points, passing the ball, probably enough to be in the flex spot for the Falcons as the only Falcon without bringing along any pass catchers. But then on the other side of it, Philip Walker's throwing multiple passing touchdowns, one to Laviska Shenault, one to Terrace Marshall. Shi Smith just has, 5 catches for 50 yards, and that's enough at 3,600. This one does have a lot. 1, 2, 3. This has 4 pass catchers from the Panthers. This would probably require a bigger score for the Panthers. It probably requires 3 or 4 touchdowns passed from Philip Walker. But again, I think that is within the realm of possibility that Philip Walker just spreads the ball around, has touchdowns to multiple guys. So all of these lineups, to me, just looking through, they all look like lineups that at least are feasible, have a chance to win. This one I don't love quite as much. Eddie Pinheiro in the captain spot with Falcons onslaught seems a little bit thin. So maybe this one I'd try to group out somehow. I could just group it out by saying don't use Eddie Pinheiro in the captain spot. Typically not how I'm going to want to play it, but there are a lot of different things that you could say. If you have Eddie Pinheiro in the captain spot, give a boost to Philip Walker, which then brings along at least one pass catcher. There are other things that you could do. I don't think that Eddie Pinheiro is likely to put up, 15 plus fantasy points in a scenario where other Panthers don't do much. So maybe I don't love, that's not my favorite lineup, but I think it's at least probably feasible. There are ways for the kicker, turnover, the special teams brings it back, to the 30-yard line for the Panthers a couple times. Like the special teams does great, but doesn't score touchdowns. Bring it down to the other end of the field. Eddie Pinheiro kicks a couple field goals easily that way. It's at least feasible, although I think that it's less likely than a lot of these other scenarios. But in general, these look good enough. I like the correlations well enough. Maybe still seeing a few too many of these. Mariota in the flex with no pass catchers for my liking. So maybe I'd go back into that group with Mariota in the flex and give bigger boosts to the pass catchers. Change these to 8, etc. Anyway, I'm not going to bother going through all of these steps now. Just want to show you my general thought process and how I set up Fantasy Cruncher. That's going to do it for this video. Good luck tonight. Hope you can find some success using this or a similar process.